2025 marked one of the worst years for wildfires in California history, taking a horrific human and economic toll, with many pointing to climate change as the culprit. But the evidence points elsewhere. I realize there are a lot of different causes for fires, but if you could isolate the single biggest cause or two in California of these wildfires, what would you say they are?
I would say, in my opinion, the biggest two would be human cause and arson.
This week, we examine the real factors behind California's recurrent fire disasters. Greenland, the immense icy island, has become a hot point between the U.S. and Europe.
Country is not for sale!
So why should America care about the fate of the frozen North?
The underlying issue here is that if a foreign power were to gain access or control of Greenland, it would pose an existential threat to the United States and to the homeland.
This week, a look at the history and the options.
I stand before you as a mother whose only child was taken by something so preventable that it should shake every person in this room to their core.
A mother's warning about an online threat to children called 764.
It is a child abuse network primarily, and pushing them to the point of either self-harm.
This week, we examine an online evil.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. For over a decade, California's wildfires have continued to grip attention. They aren't just regional disasters. They affect every taxpayer, paying tens of billions each year for firefighting, recovery, and federal disaster aid. Politicians and experts frequently point to climate change as the culprit. Today, we examine the real way people are fueling our own disasters. We arrived to the hilly terrain of Paradise, California on an unusually foggy morning, 6 years after the historic Camp Fire. Mayor Steven Crowder was elected 2 days before the fire started in November of 2018. Are you worried about another fire?
Not like we were before. I mean, we're taking a lot of preventative steps.
The Camp Fire was the deadliest and most destructive in California history, killing 84 people and causing $16 billion in damage, mostly here in the town of Paradise. In its wake, some pinned the blame on climate change.
First and foremost, we have to address climate change.
Mother Earth is angry. She's telling us, whether she's telling us with hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, fires in the West.
But the climate change narrative has sidelined a critical factor. Jesse Torres is with CAL FIRE, the state's firefighting agency. I realize there are a lot of different causes for fires, but if you could isolate the single biggest cause or two in California of these wildfires, what would you say they are?
I would say, in my opinion, the biggest two would be human cause and arson.
So people on purpose and people by accident.
Correct, yeah.
Of the big wildfires in California that you've probably heard the most about, all of them were caused by people. Nobody knows that better than Mike Ramsey. He's the Butte County District Attorney who successfully prosecuted the power company PG&E for starting the Camp Fire.
In the late 90s, we noticed a number of fires were being caused by PG&E failure to clear vegetation around their lines. Trees and high-powered lines don't mix very well.
Even as the Camp Fire burned, investigators had zeroed in on the cause, a PG&E transmission line and tower that collapsed and then melted into the brush below.
They looked up into the tower and could see that an arm had come down and that had most likely started the fire. Next day, they called me and said, It looks like this is a PG&E caused fire.
Cal Fire told you that.
Yes.
Do you think that was their way of saying, don't bother to look for an arsonist?
No, they found the arsonist. That was PG&E.
To be clear, PG&E was not convicted of arson. Ramsey says that's because he couldn't prove that the company had collective knowledge about poorly maintained equipment that employees failed to act on.
As it turns out, that it was decades of negligent maintenance, and obviously criminally negligent maintenance that came about. The hook that failed had been in that location for, we figured, 98 years. And what happened is this line, this C-hook over the years, hanging up there and going, and this is a very windy canyon, and we call it the Jarbo winds, which are 50, 60 mile an hour winds that go through there. Over the years, it had just worn until it failed. And then when it failed, the insulators came down, the line slapped into the steel structure, and then the aluminum and the steel, with that 115,000 volts through it, we figure is about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It just then melted the line and portions of the tower and just shot that down into the grass below.
So it was a nearly 100-year-old hook holding all that up.
Yeah.
In 2019, PG&E pleaded guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter and agreed to a $13.5 billion settlement for victims, plus $522 million to Butte County and the town of Paradise. PG&E equipment also sparked the 2017 Tubbs fire, killing 22 in Sonoma and Napa counties, the 2017 Thomas fire, killing 2 and burning 280,000 acres in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, and the 2021 Dixie fire, California's second largest, killing 1 and charring nearly 1 million acres. Southern California Edison triggered the 2018 Woolsey fire, killing 3 and burning nearly 100,000 acres in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. And authorities also suspect Southern California Edison in the 2025 Eaton fire that killed 17 and burned 17,000 acres. The Justice Department is suing that company for $40 million in costs. Beyond utility failures, arson is also a major human factor in California's fires. The 2024 Park Fire, California's largest man-ignited arson blaze, was allegedly set by Ronnie Stout. He's a convicted child sex offender accused of pushing a burning car into a gully, torching nearly 430,000 acres. And more recently, an arson arrest in California's third most destructive blaze, the 2025 Palisades fire in Los Angeles County, killing 12. Suspect Jonathan Rinderknecht allegedly started it by rolling a burning car into the woods. Cal Fire arrested more than 150 people for arson last year. President Trump has long pushed back hard against the climate change narrative, pointing to mismanagement by people.
And California must adopt the common sense policies to prevent fires. You got a lot of dry stuff. It's bone dry.
And the environmental...
And you know, I predicted this 7 years ago. I said, do it, get it done. And everybody laughed. They thought it was, I said, forest management. They thought it was such a funny term. Ha, 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 that's so funny. Now it's not funny anymore, you know? We were right.
It's number one cause of these fires. Number one cause.
You wouldn't have any fires.
Right.
Climate change theorists direct attention to the winds and heat that drives California's wildfires to such disastrous proportions. Ramsey says his historic prosecution of PG&E intentionally put the focus on the human spark that lights the match.
What happened was the law firm, criminal attorneys, former AUSAs, that were trying to save the company, as they said, if you prosecute them criminally and convict this company, because it's investor-owned, then they made the mistake of saying, you will kill the company. And I looked at them and I says, but you killed 84 of my citizens. I don't give a damn about your company dying or not. Perhaps it deserves to die. It was the largest corporate homicide case in United States history, but we needed to make a statement.
PG&E was forced into bankruptcy proceedings by the cost of the Camp Fire. This isn't just California's story. Nationwide, about 85% of U.S. wildfires are human-caused, from accidents and equipment failures to deliberate arson. Coming up next on Full Measure, the possibility of gaining Greenland. This week, President Trump presses his foreign policy initiatives even further. At the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, he announced he would not try to take Greenland by force.
I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
Then, after meeting with the head of NATO, he announced a framework of a future deal. To those who think Trump's pursuit of Greenland makes no sense, that may be in part because they don't know the history. Analysts agree Greenland's geostrategic significance makes it critical to protection against potential threats from Russia and China in an increasingly accessible and contested Arctic region. Today, why Greenland and why now? Greenland isn't a country. It's Danish territory and the world's largest island, 2.1 million mostly desolate, ice-covered square miles. After Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio recently met with Greenland and Danish officials, Denmark firmly declared Greenland's not for sale. Several European countries responded by deploying a small number of troops to Greenland in a symbolic show of support against Trump's talk of acquiring it.
We need it for strategic national security and international security.
Donald Trump is far from the first American president to set his sights on Greenland, and the motivation is rooted in real national security concerns.
The underlying issue here is that if a foreign power were to gain access or control of Greenland, it would pose an existential threat to the United States and to the homeland.
Can you explain geographically why Greenland is that important to us?
Because of where it sits, headed up toward the North Pole, it sits on some critical longitudinal lines for missiles. So missiles that are being fired intercontinentally, their trajectory is going to go over Greenland in most cases. That's something we're very concerned about.
Alexander Gray was Deputy Assistant to President Trump and Chief of Staff of the White House National Security Council during Trump's first term.
This is something that has a long history in U.S. strategic thought. First time we tried to buy Greenland was in the 1860s. We've tried to buy it under presidents as diverse as Woodrow Wilson, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower. FDR actually sent troops to occupy Greenland in World War II because it was so essential to our security.
During World War II, Denmark's ambassador to the U.S. signed an agreement for U.S. troops to protect Greenland from Nazi Germany, which was occupying Denmark at the time. Greenland's rich cryolite mines and strategic location made it a global center point. Cryolite was essential for building lightweight aluminum warplanes, and Greenland was a key stopover and midpoint for refueling for U.S. and Allied forces. After World War II, U.S. troops were prepared to leave Greenland when the Soviet Union emerged as a new threat. Soviet bombers could fly polar routes over the Arctic and Greenland to strike North America.
We worried in the Cold War. There's something called the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. This is the area where Soviet submarines would go right up past the Greenlandic coast to go off the east coast of the United States and threaten the east coast with nuclear missiles. We continue to worry that Russian subs could come down past the coast of Greenland undetected because the Danes don't have the capability to detect them, and we have to have control of Greenland for anti-submarine warfare purposes.
In 1946, President Truman offered $100 million for Greenland, seeking a primary base for defense. Denmark refused. Then in 1951, Amid several Eastern European countries falling to Soviet-backed communist revolutions, the U.S. and Denmark signed a new agreement for the defense of Greenland.
The drop area is a frozen inlet with a 4.5.
The U.S. built and operated Thule Air Base. Today, the base, now named Bidufik Space Base, is a critical U.S. lookout for ballistic missile early warning, space surveillance, satellite communications, and Arctic monitoring for North American defense purposes.
And my concern, and President Trump articulated this when I worked for him in the first term, he's articulated this recently, is that China and Russia are increasingly interested in getting a foothold in Greenland. The Chinese are sending submarines all the way up past Greenland to the North Pole. And we have no confidence, and we shouldn't, that Denmark is capable of doing what needs to be done to keep Greenland safe for U.S. security purposes.
With Russia remilitarizing the Arctic and China eyeing resources and influence, Greenland's importance has only grown.
There are a lot of different ways this could go. I think there are plenty of options we can offer to incentivize Greenlanders to want to be part of the United States. The short answer here is they've wanted independence from Denmark for 50 years, and they've been on a path to get it. The current situation has kind of changed the trajectory. They will get independence eventually. The question is, when they get independence, it's an island of 57,000 people. It's the second least densely populated place on Earth. When they get independence, they're immediately going to be coerced and absorbed by the Russians and the Chinese, or they're going to have the Americans waiting for them for our security and for their security and sovereignty. Which one do they want? Moscow and Beijing or Washington? And that's the choice they're going to have to decide. And I think we can make a great case for why they should choose us.
Ahead on Full Measure, the mysterious online network inciting children to attack and even commit suicide. "764 is a violent extremist group targeting children online, blackmailing them into committing violence and even encouraging them to commit suicide. Lisa Fletcher digs into the fast-evolving movement that U.S. authorities now consider a top-tier terrorism threat.
I stand before you as a mother whose only child was taken by something so preventable, so cruel, and so ignored that it should shake every person in this room to their core.
In December, Tamia Woods testified before a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. The Ohio mother is carrying the pain and now a cause from the loss of her son, who committed suicide at 17 after falling victim to a financial sextortion plot on Instagram more than 3 years ago.
One of the messages sent to my son, and I quote, "I am more determined to rot your life than to make it a waste, a trash can, a shame, a dishonor, a hell, a real disaster, a hell on earth. And I remind you that I am heartless. I have no pity to rot a life as well as yours."
For more than 19 hours, 17-year-old James was tormented by a pitiless entity most parents have never heard of. It's called 764, an online network tied to child exploitation and, experts say, a brand of extremism built around one idea: harm.
764 is a fairly loosely defined and loosely brought together network of nihilistic violent extremists. It is a child abuse network primarily. These individuals operate online, where they are interacting with young users, exploiting those users through the use of blackmail, threats of violence, and pushing them to the point of either self-harm or other damaging behaviors.
Dr. Simon Perdue is the director of the Violent Extremism Threat Monitor in Washington, D.C. He says 764 targets kids they see as easy prey.
They look for insecurities, expressions of depressive thoughts, suicidality, other forms of vulnerability that is being expressed in these online spaces.
Why?
Because they get a kick out of this. It's tied to a movement called No Lives Matter, and it's just at its very core violent, and they are pursuing suffering. That's ultimately what they want to see, is suffering.
The name 764 reportedly traces back to the network's founder, a Texas-based teenager from the Houston area with an area code of 764. The founder, Bradley Cadenhead, later pleaded guilty in a child pornography case and is now serving an 80-year prison sentence. But Purdue says this isn't a traditional group with a leader or headquarters.
Because of the almost leaderless nature of this kind of space online, it's a constantly evolving space.
That decentralization makes it hard for investigators and even harder for parents to know who's really on the other side of a screen.
What do you think would shock parents most about how quickly their child can get pulled into something like 764?
This isn't happening in spaces that you would see as violent. This is happening in very mainstream spaces that seem on the surface to be quite benign and harmless. Roblox and Minecraft, any space where there's online community and online communication is, very problematic and harmful to young users.
Purdue says cases like the death of James Woods show what this network is designed to do.
It's an evolution of cyberbullying to the point of sexual exploitation, blackmail, and self-harm.
But the main goal of this group is to get kids to harm or kill themselves.
Mm-hmm. That would be the end goal.
But it's not all of the equation.
It does include sexual abuse materials and the production of sexual abuse materials as well.
A Department of Justice official tells us the DOJ is investigating more than 36 764 cases across the country. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are now warning the country is behind.
From a parent's point of view, why is it important to make these sex torture illegal under federal law?
It's laws like this that would back our children and influence them to speak up and let them know that they're being victimized. And people need to be held accountable on top of that. They need to know that they shouldn't be comfortable with doing the things that they're doing. Right now, they're comfortable, and you see more and more people being victimized because of that.
But Purdue warns awareness alone is not enough.
Just knowing that they're out there doesn't mean that you're going to be aware every time someone pretends to be a fellow 16-year-old, tries to open a dialogue.
Because the first move isn't a threat, it's a conversation. In Washington, D.C., I'm Lisa Fletcher for Full Measure.
After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Next week on Full Measure, as our 11th season of Full Measure comes to a close, we have one of your favorites, our end of the season roundtable, looking at some of our most impactful reporting.
I became an investigative journalist, kind of like what you do.
And the biggest stories from the past year. Our Full Measure correspondents, Scott Thuman, Lisa Fletcher, and Mackenzie Frost, join me with highlights of some of your favorite stories and ours.
My camera crew and I want to find out what makes data centers so controversial.
I don't believe God made these creatures on planet Earth for us to torture and abuse.
Any other plane in the Air Force that can do what the A-10 can do?
Not in my opinion.
Until then, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable.